hand closed around her wrist beneath the table. Not rough. Not yet. Just deciding how rough to be. She set her napkin down, stood, and started to run, bare feet on cold marble, a strip of skin already taken by a broken heel, though she felt none of it. Behind her, 40 feet and closing, footsteps fell heavier on the right. No shouting, just her name. Low, even patient, the kind of voice worse than any scream. The elevator doors cracked open. She squeezed through the gap before it was wide enough. Slammed the close button, once, twice. His fist hit the steel like a struck bell. Then the doors shut. She slid to the floor, shaking in waves. Safe she was safe, until she realized the air in the elevator didn't smell like a hotel. It smelled like cedar, and something colder underneath. Metal, winter wool, that cost more than her monthly rent. She was not alone in this elevator. Dara lifted her head. The panic hit before the pain did. That was the thing about adrenaline. It was generous like that. It let you run 3 blocks in stockinged feet across cold marble before it bothered to mention the broken heel had taken a strip of skin with it. Dara Sutton was already running, past the coat check, past the flower arrangement, white orchids, too many of them, crowding their own vase, drowning in their own perfume. Past a waiter who flattened himself against the wall and watched her go with the particular expression of a man who had seen expensive evenings collapse before and had learned not to get involved. Smart man. Her dress was wrong for running. Charcoal silk, bias cut, the kind of dress that moved beautifully when you walked slowly across a room and became a liability the moment you needed to do anything else with your body. It was twisted now, hitched up past where it was supposed to sit, and she didn't stop to fix it because behind her, 40 feet and closing, Bridger Wyatt was coming. She could hear him. That was the worst part. She always could. Not shouting, not yet. Just the particular rhythm of his footsteps when he'd had 4 bourbons and something to prove. Heavier on the right, a little uneven, like the whole world needed to feel him moving through it. She knew that sound the way you knew a sound you'd spent 2 years learning to dread. The dinner had been her company's function. Sable, the restaurant she managed, the one written up in 3 national publications and 2 food blogs she actually respected. The owners threw a quarterly dinner at the Aldrich for senior staff and select vendors. Attendance was not optional. She had gone, in the black silk dress. In the heels. With her hair pinned back the way she wore it when she needed people to believe she was composed, Bridger wasn't supposed to be there. They had been over for 3 months. She had been careful. Changed her gym. Changed her dry cleaner. Told almost no one where she lived now. 3 months of small, deliberate erasures. And then he walked into the private dining room at 9:45, wearing that charcoal suit he knew she had once said she liked. And he smiled at her from across the table like he was arriving somewhere he had every right to be. She kept eating, because she was good at that, keeping her face still, keeping the silverware moving, asking the vendor to her left about his distribution network, while every nerve ending in her body went cold and sharp and alert. She lasted 40 minutes. It was the hand under the table that ended it. His fingers wrapping around her wrist. Not rough. Not yet, but certain in a way that meant he was just deciding how rough to be. She looked at him then, just looked. And what she saw in his face decided everything. She stood up, set her napkin down, walked out, and he followed. Because that was what Bridger Wyatt did when something he considered his tried to leave. The elevator bank was around the corner. She could see the alcove, brushed steel doors, low lighting, the small digital display above the center pair already blinking down from the upper floors. 14. 13. She hit the button. Hit it again. Felt her nail bend back against the plastic and didn't care. Behind her, the corridor, his footsteps, then his voice, Dara, not loud. That was the thing people didn't understand about men like Bridger. They didn't always shout. Sometimes they used your name in that particular register, low and even and patient, and it was worse than shouting. Because it meant he had decided to be controlled about it. Controlled was how he had given her the first bruise. 1 year and 4 months ago. 2 fingers, deliberately. On the inside of her upper arm where no one would see it. She did not turn around. 10-9, stop walking, 8. She pressed herself against the cool steel of the closed doors. The metal was freezing through the silk. She could feel her own heartbeat against it. Fast. Hard. Trying to get out. 7. 6. You embarrassed me tonight. His voice was closer now. Still even. You know what you did. Standing up like that in front of. 5. The ding was gentle, musical, almost. Completely indifferent to what was happening in the corridor 10 feet away, Dara Sutton did not wait for the doors to finish opening. She turned sideways, squeezed through the gap before it was wide enough. Felt the steel frame catch her shoulder, sharp, immediate, the kind of pain that would bloom purple by morning, and threw herself backward into the car. Her hand found the control panel by instinct. Close door, close door, close door, the heel of her palm working the button, over and over, frantic. Useless in the mechanical sense, the door closed when it closed, but her body needed something to do with the panic that had nowhere else that to go. Bridger rounded the corner. She saw him. He saw her, 10 feet, 8. The doors shuddered, reversed then, finally, blessedly, slid shut. His fist hit the outside of the steel. Once. The sound vibrated through the car like a struck bell. Then nothing. Dara's legs gave out. She slid down the mirrored back wall until she hit the carpet, knees to chest, arms around her shins, face down. Shaking in the specific full-body way that only happened when the adrenaline had done its job and was now presenting you with the invoice. She was safe. The elevator moved upward with a smooth, mechanical certainty that felt completely disconnected from the chaos of the last 5 minutes, the hum of the cables, the rush of conditioned air, the faint smell of... She stopped shaking, not gradually, all at once, because the air didn't smell like a hotel elevator. Hotel elevators smelled like recycled nothing. Cleaning fluid and old air, and sometimes in the bad ones, other people's anxiety. This air smelled like cedar, and something colder underneath it, metal. Winter, wool that cost more than her monthly rent. Dara lifted her head. He was standing in the opposite corner. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, had simply stood there and watched her throw herself into the car, slams buttons and collapse onto the floor in a heap of torn silk and ruined mascara. And he had not said a single word. He was leaning against the brass rail, hands in the pockets of a charcoal suit that fit him, the way suits fit men who have them made for a specific body by someone who understands the difference. Not young. 50, or a year or two past. Hair that had gone salt and pepper and stayed there, cut close on the sides. A face arranged by time and weather into something that was not quite handsome in a conventional sense and was more interesting for it. Sharp jaw. A nose that had been broken at least once and healed slightly imperfect, deep-set eyes. Dark. Some shade between brown and gray that the elevator light wouldn't resolve. And completely, terrifyingly still, not still like a man who was waiting. Still like a man who had run out of things that surprised him a long time ago and had made a kind of peace with the quiet on the other side of that. He wasn't looking at her with pity. Wasn't looking at her with the mild irritation of a hotel guest whose evening had been disrupted. Wasn't cycling through the expressions people cycled through when a stranger's crisis arrived uninvited. He was just watching, with a quality of attention that felt like something being measured, carefully, without hurry, and his right hand rested on the brass rail, on his index finger, a heavy silver ring. Engraved, an eagle's head set in thorns. Dara's breath stopped. Her brain, waterlogged with leftover panic and 3 glasses of wine she hadn't wanted, took approximately 4 seconds to process the image. Then it processed it, the Calder crest. If you worked in high-end hospitality in this city, if you managed a room where powerful men came to eat and be seen eating, you knew the Calder family the way sailors knew certain rocks. Not by introduction, by reputation. By the damage they could do if you got too close, and by the instinct to ensure the wine was always correct and the table was always ready. The Calders owned the port. Owned half the real estate in the financial district. Owned, if the whispers that circulated through the kitchen entrances of expensive restaurants were to be believed. A significant portion of the police department's loyalties, and a non-trivial portion of the city council's attention span. They were not merely wealthy. Wealthy was a category. What the Calder family was structural, load-bearing. Remove them and entire sections of the city's economy, legal and otherwise, would shift in ways that took years to understand and longer to repair. And the man at the head of it, the one who had taken over after his father's heart gave out 3 years ago, the one the papers had stopped writing about because he'd made it very clear he found that kind of attention inconvenient, was Stellan Calder, who was now looking at her from across an elevator. Dara became acutely aware of several things. In rapid succession, she was sitting on the floor. Her dress was hitched inappropriately. There was blood on her ankle. Her mascara was doing something she did not want to think about. And she had just, with great enthusiasm and zero situational awareness, thrown herself into a private elevator, occupied by a man whose family was known to make inconvenient people permanently oh no. She scrambled upright, her stockings slipped on the carpet, and she grabbed the brass rail, found her footing, pressed her spine against the wall. Put as much distance between them as the small space allowed, which was not much. His eyes tracked her movement without hurry. Without expression. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was low, a full register below what you expected from a man his height. Not unpleasant, just flat in the way that suggested he had stopped performing for audiences sometime around his 40th birthday and had not bothered to start again. Dara looked down. The shoulder she'd scraped coming through the elevator doors had left a thin trail of red along the inside of her upper arm. She pressed her thumb against it. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. Sandpaper and wine and 40 minutes of pretending not to be afraid at a dinner table. Stellan Calder looked at her thumb pressed uselessly against the cut. Then back at her face. "You're not," he said, simply, as a matter of record. Then he reached into his interior pocket and produced a folded white handkerchief, held it out across the space between them, didn't step toward her, didn't lean, just held it there with the air of a man who had extended his arm and was not going to explain himself further. Dara stared at it, took it, pressed it against her arm. The elevator continued its smooth, indifferent ascent. The digital display ticked upward. 18. 19. The man in the lobby, Stellan said, not a question. A subject being introduced. "My ex," Dara said. And then, because she could not entirely stop herself, "He wasn't supposed to be there tonight." They rarely are. Something about the dryness of it caught her off guard. She looked up. His face hadn't changed. But there was something at the very edge of it, not quite amusement. Something more considered than that. "He'll be at the front desk now," she said, demanding to know what floor I went to. "Yes," Stellan said. "He will, he knows people here." The bartender on the second floor. A woman in reservations. She heard herself talking too much and couldn't stop. The adrenaline was still moving through her system, looking for somewhere to go. "He's not going to give up just because the door's closed?" "No," Stellan said. "He's not 24. 25. The soft chime. The doors opened. The hallway was dim. Charcoal carpet. Low sconces throwing long shadows down the walls. And 2 men standing outside. Large men, the kind of large that came from deliberate construction rather than accident. Dark suits. Hands folded. Eyes that moved to Dara for exactly 1 second before settling on Stellan with an attention that was not quite deference and not quite submission. Something in the middle. Like men who respected the person they worked for and were not required to perform it. The taller one had a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Pale and old. He met her eyes without blinking. Dara's spine went rigid. Stellan straightened from the rail, moved toward the open doors with that quality of movement she would only later find a word for. Economical. Nothing wasted. Nothing performed. Just a man moving through space with the quiet certainty that the space would accommodate him. He paused in the doorway. "You can ride back down," he said, facing the corridor, not her. "The lobby is floor 1. The button is clearly marked." He stepped out, walked past his men, who created a corridor for him without being asked. Dara stood in the elevator. The closed door button was 3 feet away. She could hit it. She could be moving downward in 4 seconds. Back to the lobby. Back to the marble and the orchids and the ambient jazz and Bridger Wyatt. Waiting by the front desk, she had watched enough difficult evenings at Sable to know exactly what Bridger looked like right now. Red in the face and certain. Talking to whoever would listen. Demanding in the way of men who were used to demands being met because no one had yet found the courage to tell them no clearly enough to make it stick. He was down there. She was up here. And the man with the scar had placed his hand flat against the open elevator door. Patient. Immovable. Holding it. "You can step out." Stellan's voice drifted back from the dim corridor. He hadn't stopped walking. "The choice is yours." It wasn't a choice. She understood that. It was a set of options presented by a man who already knew which one she'd take, because he had looked at her in that elevator and understood something about her that she hadn't said out loud. She stepped out. The doors closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The suite at the end of the corridor was not what she expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Ostentation, maybe. The kind of penthouse that advertised wealth at volume, gold fixtures, oversized artwork, furniture that was expensive because it was supposed to be noticed. This wasn't that. It was large, brutally so. Floor-to-soiling windows on the far wall offered the city at night in its full sprawling grid of light, cold and distant and beautiful, in the way of things that did not require your approval to be beautiful. The furniture was dark leather and brushed steel and polished slate. Clean lines, no clutter, no photographs on the walls, no evidence that anyone had ever tried to make this space feel like home. Because whoever lived here had no interest in that particular project. It felt like a room maintained by a man who had sorted his life, a long time ago, into what was essential and what was noise, and had removed everything in the second category without sentiment and without looking back. Stellan had moved to the kitchen, a sleek stretch of marble and dark cabinetry. He shrugged off his suit jacket, tossed it over a bar stool. The holster appeared. Black leather, worn in the way of something used regularly, a dark handgun resting against his white shirt with the casual belonging of a wristwatch. He didn't acknowledge it. Dara stood just inside the doorway and stared at it. He opened a cabinet, pulled out a black medical kit, set it on the marble, ran water over a cloth. "Sit," he said. She sat, because her ankle was talking to her now in earnest, and because arguing felt like a sophisticated activity requiring more blood sugar than she currently possessed. The leather sofa was cold through the thin silk. She pulled her knees in, made herself small in the corner of it, watched him cross the room and pull the glass coffee table close with one hand, the legs scraping against hardwood, and sit on the edge of it, directly across from her, close. Closer than she expected. She could see the scars on his knuckles, not fresh. Old and silver white, woven into the skin like parentheses around all the stories he was never going to tell her. He opened the kit. "Your arm," he said. "It's just a scrape." He looked up. Dark eyes. Unhurried. "I know what it is," he said. "Give me your arm, no menace in it, no pressure." Just the sentence, stated with the certainty of a man who did not repeat himself because repeating himself was a waste of time he did not have. Dara extended her arm. He took her wrist. His grip was impersonal, firm and entirely without theater. His fingers were warm. Warmer than she'd expected from a man who seemed to run cold in every other way. And he turned her arm in the light and looked at the scrape with the focused attention of someone who was actually going to address the problem, rather than simply comment on it. He dragged the damp cloth across it. She hissed, "Hold still." His voice had dropped a fraction, still flat, but lower, the way a voice dropped when the speaker was concentrating on something else and the performance fell away entirely. He discarded the cloth, tore an alcohol pad from its foil with his teeth, pressed it to the raw skin without preamble. The pain was immediate. White and specific, she dug her fingers into the sofa leather and did not pull her arm back. Because he was holding her wrist, and because letting him see her flinch twice felt like more than she could afford right now. "You ran without looking," he said. Conversational. Applying antiseptic with even pressure. Into the elevator. "Didn't check the car. I was aware I was in a hurry. You were reacting to the noise behind you." He set the used pad on the table, reached for gauze. That's how prey moves. Head down, eyes back. No lateral awareness. She stared at him. "I had a bad night," she said. "You had an unsuccessful exit strategy," he said. "Those are different problems." He cut the gauze, pressed it over the scrape, reached for tape. "A bad night is weather. You couldn't have prevented it. An unsuccessful exit strategy is a skill gap. You can?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "You're taping a cut on a woman you met 6 minutes ago," she said, "in an elevator. After which you brought her to your private suite." A pause. "And you're giving her tactical feedback." He glanced up. Something shifted at the very edge of his expression. Not quite a smile. "The territory adjacent to it. You'd prefer I didn't?" he said. "I'd prefer to understand what's happening." He pressed the last strip of tape down, released her wrist, leaned back slightly, and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the elevator. Thorough, not intrusive. "Just complete, you're safe for tonight," he said. "The elevators to these floors require encrypted key cards. The stairwells are locked from outside. The 2 men in the hallway will remain there until morning." He closed the medical kit with a precise click. "Your ex-boyfriend is currently in the lobby, which he will not be able to leave via this route. And tomorrow?" she said. "Tomorrow you walk out the front door." He stood. What happens after that is your concern. He showed her the guest room without ceremony. End of the corridor, left, bathroom attached, clean towels. He did not offer more than that. He was already walking back toward the living area before she had fully registered that the conversation was over. Mr. Calder, she said. He paused. Didn't turn fully. Just stopped. Why, she said. A beat. Why what? You could have let the doors close. You could have had your man walk me back to the lobby the second I stepped out. You don't know me. I'm an inconvenience. He was quiet for a moment. You didn't beg, he said. She frowned. What? When you recognized me, he turned slightly. Just enough that she caught his profile, the sharp jaw, the broken nose. Most people, when they understand what they're looking at, they perform. They apologize. They become very small, very quickly. They try to make themselves harmless by making themselves pathetic. A pause. You didn't. I was too scared to perform, she said honestly. No, he said it with a certainty that was not unkind. You were scared and you were still calculating your options. Those are different things. Another pause. I don't keep people around me who collapse when the room changes. It's inefficient. He walked back to the living area. She stood in the dim hallway for a moment with that rattling around in her chest. Efficient. She had just been described as efficient by a man who kept a gun against his ribs the way other men kept a pen in their breast pocket. She went to the guest room. The bed was enormous. White linens, tight and cold, the kind of sheets that had been ironed by someone who believed the quality of a fold was not incidental. She bypassed it and went straight to the bathroom, turned on the shower, stood under water that was too hot and let it sting. There was a block of cedar soap in the marble alcove. She stood there for a while holding it. Not washing, just standing in the steam and being temporarily nowhere. Between the dinner and whatever came next. Between the woman who had walked into the Aldrich in good heels and whoever she was going to have to be in the morning, she used the soap. It smelled exactly like his jacket had. She wasn't going to think about that. In the bedroom, she found the dresser. Top drawer. Black and charcoal t-shirts, folded with a precision that suggested someone who believed the quality of a fold was not incidental. She took the smallest one. It fell to mid-thigh. She climbed into the enormous bed. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the absolute quiet of a room, 40 floors above the strait, and watched the city's ambient light shift across the white ceiling and tried to organize the evening into something with sense. Bridger was in the lobby. Or had been. He would have left eventually. Hotels called police when guests became disruptive, and Bridger was loud when he'd been drinking, but he was also, at his core, a man who understood consequences. He would leave. He would not stop. Those were two different things. She knew his next move. The way a night cascaded forward into the next day. He would go home. He would drink more. He would call. He would leave messages in that sliding scale she'd memorized. Rage, then grief, then the quiet at the end that was worse than both. And at some point, he would find out what floor the elevator had gone to, because Bridger Wyatt always found out things. It was one of the few competencies he possessed that she had consistently underestimated. 2 a.m, she'd been lying there for 3 hours. Her throat was dry. The air conditioning was pulling the moisture from the room with an efficiency that matched everything else on this floor. She pushed back the duvet, swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Her ankle protested. She ignored it. The hallway was dark, the living area was darker, except for the glow of the city through the panoramic windows. That cold, constant, indifferent light that cities made when everyone in them was doing something else, and no one had turned it on intentionally. And the shape of a man in the low leather chair near the glass. Stellan Calder sat with his back to her, a crystal tumbler in his right hand, ice long since melted. He was in a dark gray t-shirt now, the suit gone, and even from across the room she could see the tattoos that wrapped his left forearm. Dark ink, geometric and dense, the kind that told a longer story than the visible portion. He hadn't turned a light on, just sitting there, looking at the city. As if the city were saying something he found quietly interesting, or as if he had simply decided that this view of the world would do for the hours between midnight and daylight. The water is filtered through the tap, he said, without turning. Without any shift in posture that suggested he'd heard her arrive. He had simply known she was there before she crossed the threshold. She moved to the kitchen, found a glass, drank half of it standing at the sink. I didn't mean to wake you, she said. You didn't. A pause. The melted ice clinked once. I don't sleep tonight? In general, she should go back to the room. The smart thing, the logical, self-preserving thing, was to finish the water, say nothing further, and put as much carpeted hallway as possible between herself and whatever was forming in the air between them. Instead, did he leave? Stellan turned his head. Not all the way. Just enough to angle toward her, the way you angled toward a sound you wanted to locate precisely. Yes, he said. He made noise first. My man handled it, a beat. He has a fractured cheekbone. She stared at the back of his head. You had him hurt? I had him removed, flat. Final. He resisted. The physics of the situation became unfortunate for him. She put the glass down on the counter. She didn't know what she felt about that. It was a complicated feeling in a complicated night, and she didn't have the bandwidth to sort it at 2 a.m. in a strange kitchen. So she put it in the drawer with everything else and closed it. Thank you, she said, because whatever the complications were, the man who had been following her through hotel lobbies for 3 months had a fractured cheekbone and was in a taxi somewhere. And that was something. Stellan said nothing, took a slow sip of the watered-down whiskey. Go to sleep, he said. Tomorrow you disappear. Then, not looking at her, still facing the city, he said one more thing, Bridger Wyatt. His father Otis owes this house a debt. 11 years and counting. A pause. Just long enough to land. You didn't stumble into my elevator by accident. That's all I'll say tonight. She stood at the sink and held that the water was still running. She turned it off, she went back to the room, and this time, she slept. Morning came through the gap in the curtains like a verdict, cold, white, without ceremony. Dara woke with the particular physical clarity of a body that had processed a major adrenaline event while she slept and was now presenting her with the itemized damage report. Her ankle, her shoulder, the scrape on her arm, clean and properly bandaged, pulling slightly as she sat up, her feet, which had crossed half the Aldrich Hotel without shoes, communicating their objections in terms that did not require translation. She sat on the edge of the bed, listened. The suite was quiet, not the tense, coiled quiet of the night before. Something more settled. A Sunday morning quality. She found the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like someone who'd had a good reason not to sleep well. She did not put the ruined dress back on. She was not doing that. She turned the t-shirt into something workable, pulled her hair back with a rubber band from the bathroom drawer, and walked out into the corridor. He was at the island, navy suit. No jacket. White sleeves rolled to the elbow, the tattoos visible in the morning light, more detailed than she'd caught last night. Dark lines that had been considered before being put down permanently. He was reading a document and marking it in pencil. A ceramic mug of black espresso sat near his left hand. He did not look up. There's a bag on the sofa, he said. She crossed to the charcoal leather couch, brown paper bag, unmarked. Inside, dark jeans folded neatly, a plain black cashmere sweater, leather flats in a color she would have chosen herself, tucked into the collar of the sweater, a white envelope. She opened it. 5 crisp $100 bills, sequential. The kind of cash that came directly from somewhere organized. No note. She stood there, holding the envelope, and felt something settle into a cold, specific weight in her chest. She understood the transaction being offered. She had managed a room full of men who spoke in transactions for 11 years. She knew how to read them. Last night, she had been an inconvenience. This morning, she was being paid to remain one. She set the envelope on the island beside his espresso. He looked at it. Then at her. I don't need your money, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. The clothing was practical, he said. You couldn't walk out in a torn dress, I know that. She kept her voice even. I'm not talking about the clothing. I'm talking about $500 with no note and no explanation. She held his gaze. I know what that is. He was quiet for a moment. Pride, he said, is a significant liability for someone in your position. So is being in debt to a man whose terms I don't know. She didn't look away. I don't take money I haven't earned. The pencil stopped moving against the document. He looked at her for a deliberate stretch of time. Not hostile, not dismissive. The same quality of attention she'd encountered since the elevator, measuring. Like she was a problem he was deciding whether to find worth solving. Suit yourself, he said, and went back to the document. She changed in the guest room. The jeans fit perfectly, which was unsettling in a way she chose not to examine. The cashmere sweater was the softest thing she had owned in years. The flats were exactly her size. She put the envelope back in the paper bag and left it on the bed. Then she shouldered her small canvas bag, the one she'd packed the night before, containing socks, 2 t-shirts, her toothbrush, and her work notebook, and moved toward the heavy oak doors. "The driver is in the black sedan on the lower level," Stellan said without looking up. "Give him an intersection, not an address. Walk the rest." She stopped. "How do you know where I'm going?" she said. "I don't," he said. "That's why I said an intersection." She looked at the back of his head for a moment. "Goodbye, Mr. Calder," she said. He marked something in the document. "Goodbye, Miss Sutton," he said. She pushed through the oak doors. Boone was in the corridor. The scar through his brow, the patient expression, the absence of any need to fill the silence. He walked her to the elevator without being asked, stood with his hand on the door until she was inside, then stepped back. The doors closed. She was alone. She watched the numbers count down, 42, 41, 40. By the time she reached the lobby, she had herself assembled. Cashmere, canvas bag, clean face. She walked through the orchid-scented air without looking at the front desk, out through the revolving door, into the heat of a city morning that had no idea what kind of night she'd had and didn't particularly care. The black sedan was at the curb. The apartment was exactly as she had left it. Narrow rooms, old floors. The smell of the vanilla candles she burned to cover the upstairs neighbor's cigarette smoke. The dead plant in the kitchen window she had not gotten around to replacing. The stack of unopened mail on the table by the door, home. Her specific, imperfect. Hers, she dragged the chain lock across, braced the dining chair under the handle. A habit she'd developed over the last 6 months. The kind of habit you developed when someone had once turned a key that wasn't his key in your door and was standing in your kitchen when you got home. She stood in the middle of the small living room, breathed. The answering machine, the old wired one, because she'd stopped giving her cell number to people she didn't trust absolutely, was blinking, 14 messages. She pressed play. They followed the pattern she'd memorized the way you memorized weather. Not because you could stop it, but because at least you knew when to go inside. Anger first, then the middle section. Grief. Promises. The voice that cracked on the word love in the way of a man who had learned that it moved people and had not yet noticed that it no longer moved her. Then, the last message, 4:15 a.m. The timestamp in red. His voice was different, entirely sober. Quiet in the way that Bridger Wyatt was quiet when he'd gotten past the emotion and into something more deliberate. "I found out what floor that elevator went to. I know who lives up there. I know who he is." A sound that might have been a careful breath. "I don't care who he is. He's going to be done with you. Sooner or later, men like that are always done, and when he is, I will be here. Because you're mine, you hear me? You belong to me, click." The machine flashed 0. Dara sat down on the floor, back against the door, knees up, not like she had in the elevator, not panic, not the collapse of terror. This was deliberate. She sat down and she thought, "I found out what floor that elevator went to. Bridger had contacts in this hotel. The bartender on the 2nd floor. A woman in reservations whose name Dara had made the mistake of mentioning once, a year and a half ago, when she had still been the kind of persons who told Bridger things he knew, which meant he would come. Not tonight. Bridger had a fractured cheekbone and an ego that needed time to harden before it could be weaponized. But he would come. He would wait outside her job. He would be in the alley behind her building on a Tuesday morning when she took out the trash. He would be patient in the specific, terrible way of men who had nothing else to do with their patience. She looked at her hands, the bandage on her upper arm, white and neat, the scrape on her heel she hadn't properly addressed. Her stockings, somewhere on the Aldrich lobby floor. She looked at the canvas bag by the door. She'd packed it the night before, after the first message, before the rest of them. Just in case. Because somewhere in her, the self-preservation instinct had been doing its own calculations without waiting for her permission. The bag held socks, underwear, 2 t-shirts, her toothbrush, her work notebook. That was it. The whole portable version of her life. She thought about what Stellan Calder had said at 2 a.m, facing the city with his melted whiskey, Bridger Wyatt. His father Otis owes this house a debt. 11 years and counting. You didn't stumble into my elevator by accident. She'd been turning that over since she woke up, letting it sit at the back of her mind where the things that needed to be solved in silence went. to be worked on without her conscious interference. And the conclusion it kept arriving at was this. She had not walked into a random elevator and encountered a random powerful man who happened to have a connection to her ex-boyfriend. She had walked into a situation that had been not engineered exactly, but not coincidental, which meant the problem was bigger than she'd been treating it, and the resources she had for addressing a problem this size were herself, a canvas bag with 2 t-shirts in it, and an apartment with a broken door lock. She stood up, picked up the bag, looked around the apartment once, the dead plant, the stack of mail, the answering machine with its red 0. She was not the kind of person who sat and waited to be found. She walked out. The Aldrich lobby was all cool air and white orchids, and the quiet industry of a weekday morning. The daytime concierge looked up as she pushed through the revolving door. His practiced smile faltered slightly, taking in the canvas bag, the borrowed cashmere, the set of her jaw. "May I help you, miss?" "I need to send a message to the penthouse." She kept her voice even. The same register she used when a difficult table needed managing and she needed to be the calmest person in the room. To Stellan Calder, the concierge's hand stilled on his keyboard. His eyes moved to the lobby, to the people around them. Brief, alarmed inventory. "I'm sorry. We don't." "Tell him Dara Sutton is downstairs," she said. "Tell him I have a proposal. And tell him I left his envelope on the bed." She stepped back to the emerald green sofa, sat down, set the bag between her feet, and waited. She had run out of running. Now she was going to do something else entirely. The lobby moved around her, guests, staff, the distant sound of a pianist warming up in the bar somewhere down the corridor. And Dara Sutton sat in the middle of it with her hands in her lap, and her spine straight, and thought carefully about what she was going to say to a man who kept a gun at his ribs and had described her survival instincts as efficient. She was going to make him a deal, an honest one, with actual terms. And she was going to make it good enough that he couldn't say no. 10 minutes, then the elevator opened, and Boone walked toward her. She stood up. The ride up was worse than the first time, because the first time she hadn't known what she was walking into. This time she did. Boone stood beside her in the elevator, not close, not threatening, just present in the way of a large piece of furniture that happened to breathe, and Dara watched the numbers climb and told herself she was not making a mistake. 22. 23. She was possibly making a mistake. 24. 25. The doors opened. Same dim corridor, same charcoal carpet, same low sconces, except this time the oak doors at the end were already open, spilling afternoon light into the hallway like an invitation, or a warning, depending on how you read it. She walked toward them. Stellan was standing at the windows when she entered, not sitting, standing, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crystal tumbler, amber, 1 cube, looking out at the city the way he'd been looking at it at 2 in the morning, except now it was daylight. And the city looked different, less forgiving, all hard edges and flat rooftops, and the distant silver thread of the river. He didn't turn. "You left the envelope," he said. "Yes, and the clothing?" "No. I kept the clothing." She set her bag down by the door. The clothing was practical. The money was something else. He turned then, slowly. The daylight hit him differently, harder, more specific. She could see what she'd missed in the controlled dimness of last night, the depth of the lines at the corners of his eyes. The way the gray in his hair wasn't uniform. Darker underneath, lighter at the temples. The particular quality of stillness in his face that she was beginning to understand was not coldness, it was economy. Everything this man did, he had decided to do. Nothing was accidental. She crossed the room and set the envelope on the marble island. "I have a proposal," she said. He said nothing, which she was already learning meant continue. "I can't outrun Bridger Wyatt. I've tried the practical options, new address, new gym, new routine. He has a long memory and too much time, and a father who apparently has reasons to want me visible and trackable." She kept her voice level, professional, the way she briefed her kitchen staff before a complicated service. "So the practical options are gone, and the impractical one," Stellan said, "is standing in my living room. The impractical one is standing in your living room asking for 14 days. She held his gaze. "I need your doors, your security. The specific and well-documented fact that Bridger Wyatt will not walk through a threshold that belongs to the Calder family, a beat. In exchange, I give you something useful." The tumbler rested against his palm. He hadn't taken a sip. "Go on," he said. "I manage Sable." She kept it clean, direct, Every man with real power in this city eats at my tables at least once a month. Politicians, port authority, finance. The ones whose names appear in priest leases, and the ones whose names don't appear anywhere. They come in. They eat. They drink expensive wine, and they talk to each other, and they forget I'm there. She paused. I never forget I'm there. He looked at her. You're offering me intelligence from a restaurant, he said. I'm offering you 11 years of watching powerful men become careless over the second bottle. She didn't blink. I know which city councilman brings a woman who isn't his wife every third Thursday. I know which port authority manager switches from bourbon to club soda and tips badly when he's under pressure. I know which real estate developer meets with the same lawyer he publicly claimed to have no relationship with. She stopped. Let that sit. I never wrote any of it down. It's all up here. She touched her temple. I'll tell you anything you want to know. 14 days. Then we renegotiate or I leave. The city stretched out behind him, indifferent. Stellan was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that a lesser version of herself might have filled it with a qualification, an apology, a softening of the terms. She didn't fill it. She waited. 14 days, he said finally. You follow my rules in this house. No leaving the floor without Boone. No personal phone calls without routing through the building's secure line. No questions about my work. He set the tumbler down on the marble with a precise, definitive sound. In exchange, my doors, my security. And no one in this building will let Bridger Wyatt within 30 feet of you. She nodded once. Agreed. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he picked up his tumbler and walked back to the window. Boone will walk you through the house rules, he said. The guest room is yours. Don't touch the thermostat. She picked up her bag. And that was how Dara Sutton moved into the 42nd floor of the Aldrich Hotel on a Tuesday afternoon, with a canvas bag containing 2 t-shirts and a toothbrush. The house rules, as Boone delivered them, were brief. He walked her through them in the kitchen, with the same tone he probably used to brief new personnel. Flat, factual, no editorial. No personal calls without routing through the building's secure line. No leaving the floor without him or Reeves, the second guard who spoke less than Boone did, which she had not initially thought possible. No engaging with hotel staff about the nature of her presence. No discussing the suite's security arrangements, the names of the men in the hallway, or anything she observed about Mr. Calder's daily schedule. And the thermostat, she said. Boone's expression didn't change. He keeps it at 68. He sleeps better cold, a beat. Don't touch it. What happens if I touch it? Nothing dramatic, Boone said. He just becomes less easy to be around. She looked at him. There was something almost dry in the delivery. Not a joke exactly. More like an acknowledgement that some truths did not require embellishment. Got it, she said. 68. She spent the first afternoon learning the geography of the place. Not snooping, mapping. There was a difference, and she was a woman who understood the difference. The living area, the kitchen, the 2 hallways, one toward the guest room, one deeper into the suite toward what she presumed were private quarters she was not going to approach. The small study off the living area, visible when the door was partially open. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a heavy wooden desk, a single lamp, papers organized in a way that looked like chaos but almost certainly wasn't. She didn't go in, but she noted it. She noted everything. Day 1, day 2, day 3. She learned the rhythms of the floor the same way she'd learned the rhythms of every kitchens she'd ever worked in. Not by asking, by watching. By standing in one place long enough that the pattern of the place moved around her and disclosed itself. Stellan was up before 6, every morning. She knew this because the espresso machine ran at 5:58, and the sound carried through the corridor with a reliability that made it, after 3 days, feel like a kind of clock. He read physical documents, reports, dense and unformatted, and marked them in pencil. Never pen. She'd noticed that on the first morning and found she couldn't stop noticing it after. Always pencil, because he always expected to revise. He received calls in the study with the door closed. He ate once a day that she observed, and the meal was always simple. Nothing that required attention. Food as fuel rather than event. He moved through the suite with a deliberateness that she found herself watching against her better judgment. Not because it was graceful, though it was, in the way of men who had been trained by circumstances to waste nothing, but because it was so utterly without performance. He was not presenting himself to anyone. He was simply moving through his own space doing what needed doing, and the absence of any audience awareness in him was unusual, in a way she couldn't entirely account for. Most powerful men she'd encountered at Sable performed constantly. The specific performance varied: charm, authority, accessibility, intimidation. But they were always performing. For the table. For the room. For the version of themselves they needed the room to believe in. Stellan Calder performed for no one. She wasn't sure if that was more frightening or less, probably both. He asked her questions about Sable in the evenings, not long conversations. More like deliberate openings. He would be reading. She would be at the kitchen island with her notebook, handling the inventory allocation for the following week that Boone had allowed her to manage remotely. And he would ask, without looking up, the Port Authority manager, "When did you first notice the pattern?" And she would tell him. Specifically, dates, behaviors, the way the man's table choices shifted when he was under pressure. Stellan listened without interrupting, occasionally asked a clarifying question, always precise. Always aimed at the specific data point rather than the surrounding context. He was collecting information the way she collected information. Not for its own sake. For a purpose she could identify the shape of without being able to see the details. She found she didn't mind the questions. She'd been carrying this knowledge for years with no one to give it to. No one who would understand its value or know what to do with it. It had just accumulated. All the things she'd seen at those tables. All the things powerful men revealed when they forgot the help was listening. And it had sat in her like ballast. Stellan received it without surprise or gratitude, which was, in its own strange way, a kind of respect. He was not surprised that she had noticed. He was not grateful that she was sharing. He simply used it. She told herself that was all it was. She mostly believed herself. Day 4, Tuesday evening. Just past 9, the floor was quiet. Boone and Reeves had done the security rotation at 8. Stellan was in the study with the door partially closed, his desk lamp throwing a narrow bar of yellow light into the hallway. Dara was in the guest room. Not sleeping, reading, or trying to. The day's notebook open beside her on the bed. A glass of water on the nightstand. The suite had the kind of quiet that had texture, not empty quiet. Settled quiet. The way a room felt when the people in it had reached a temporary equilibrium. And then, through the wall to her left, a voice low, male. Not Stellan. She set the notebook down. The guest room shared a wall with a suite she'd assumed was unoccupied. Boone had mentioned that the rooms on this floor were kept empty during Mr. Calder's stays. A security perimeter, except someone was in there now. She sat very still. And listened. The voice was muffled, careful. The specific quality of someone speaking quietly, not because the conversation was gentle, but because it was not meant to be overheard. Fragments. Tomorrow. Before 8, the east entrance. Not the main. He won't know until it's all ready. And then, a number. She didn't catch all of it, but enough. A phone number said aloud carefully, in the way of someone confirming a destination before they committed to the journey. Then silence. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after that, because she recognized what she'd just heard. She had worked around enough men with complicated arrangements to know the sound of a conversation that was not supposed to happen. The deliberateness of it, the hour of it, someone on this floor, in that room reporting something to someone outside. Tomorrow. Before 8, east entrance. She thought about staying quiet. She ran the full calculation, the way you ran a difficult table situation, weighing the variables before you moved. If she said nothing, she remained invisible, uninvolved. 14 days and she walked out clean. Whatever was happening in the suite next door was not her business. Had not been her business from the moment she stepped off the elevator, except she had made a deal. And a deal meant something. Or it meant nothing. Those were the only two options. The study door was still partially open. She knocked once. Stellan looked up from the desk, pencil in hand. The dense table of numbers resting under his palm. He looked at her face, and something in his expression changed, subtle. A different quality of focus from the usual variety. "Sit down," he said. She sat across the desk and told him everything. Not embellished, not minimized. Every word she'd caught through the wall. The fragments of timing, the direction, east entrance. The number, as much of it as she'd retained. Stellan listened without moving. When she finished, the study was very quiet. "You could have stayed quiet," he said. "Yes. It would have been safer for you, probably. Why tell me?" She met his gaze. "Because a deal means something. Mine and yours." Both, a beat. And because if someone on this floor is reporting your movements to someone outside, that's not a problem that disappears because I pretended not to hear it. The pencil tapped once against the desk. Once, then was still. The room next to yours, he said, should have been empty, I know, which means someone arranged for it not to be. I know that too. He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp threw shadows across his face, the hollow of his cheek, the line of his jaw, the old break in his nose catching the light. Something was moving behind his eyes. Not surprise, not alarm. The particular quality of a mind that was processing new information and integrating it with speed. Go to bed, he said. I'll handle this. She stood. Dara, she stopped. He hadn't used her first name since that first morning at the island. Just her last name or nothing. The sound of it, specific, deliberate, landed differently than she expected. You made the right call, he said. Flat. Final, not warm, but real. She nodded once and went to bed. She didn't sleep, but differently before. Not fear insomnia, thinking insomnia. The kind where your mind was doing its own investigation and wouldn't clock out until it had something to show. Someone on this floor had been placed in that room by someone with enough access to manage a reservation on a secured floor, and had been reporting Stellan's schedule to an outside number, which meant someone inside the house was compromised. Not Boone. She would have bet significant money on Boone. The man was a closed system. Reeves she didn't know well enough, someone else. Someone with access she hadn't mapped yet. And the outside number connected to what? Bridger Wyatt. His father, Otis, owes this house a debt. 11 years and counting. She lay in the dark and assembled the pieces the way she assembled a difficult service. What goes where? What supports what? What falls over if you pull one element from the structure? Otis Wyatt, an 11-year-old debt. Bridger used as a tool to track her position connected to Stellan. Someone inside reporting Stellan's schedule, not separate problems, one problem, with multiple faces. She fell asleep at 3 a.m. with that sitting on her chest like a stone. Day 5, Wednesday. Stellan was at the island when she came out. Espresso, pencil, documents. The same as every morning, except yes, there was a second mug, already poured. Sitting on the other side of the island, she looked at it. Looked at him. He was reading and not looking at her. She sat down and drank the coffee. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then, Kellum, he said without looking up. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Who is Kellum? The man who coordinates our financial arrangements. Has done for 12 years, the pencil moved. He was in the room next to yours. She absorbed that. He arranged to be there 3 days ago. Under a different name, a page turned. He's been with this house since I was 40. Before that, with my father, she didn't say anything. Because there was nothing useful to say to that, and she understood the weight of it without needing it explained to her. Otis Wyatt, Stellan said. Still not looking up. He isn't running from his debt. He never was. He's been preparing. Building leverage, another page turned. He found something on Kellum. Something about Kellum's brother. The result is, Kellum has been feeding him information for 6 weeks. And me, Dara said. Now he looked up. You were a signal, he said. Bridger pursuing you into my building. That was Otis testing whether I'd respond. Whether you meant anything to me. Whether I'd expose my schedule or my security arrangements to deal with a domestic incident. A pause. If I ignored it, he'd know I wouldn't protect civilians on principle. If I moved aggressively, he'd know your response time. Your protocols. She set the mug down. He'd know what an angry Stellan Calder looks like. Something shifted at the edge of his expression. Almost imperceptible. Yes, he said. She looked at her hands. So I was a probe, she said. From the beginning, from before the beginning, he was watching her now. Not moving. Otis placed Bridger near you 8 months ago. The relationship wasn't accidental. The kitchen was very quiet. She took a breath. Let it out slowly. 8 months. She had spent 8 months changing her gym, changing her dry cleaner, learning new locks and new routes and new silences. And the whole time the problem had been larger than she'd been treating it, had always been larger. She'd been putting a bandage over a splinter that connected to something much deeper and much more deliberate. She turned back. What happens to Kellum, she said. That's being handled. That's not an answer. He looked up. Patient? He made a mistake under duress, Stellan said. His brother is not responsible for the choice made to use him as leverage. Kellum will leave this house. He will not be harmed. The leverage Otis held over him will be removed. A pause. Does that satisfy you? She looked at him. That's more fair than he probably deserves, she said. Cruelty is easy, Stellan said. It's also inefficient. He turned a page. I have enough problems that actually require my attention. That evening, Boone came to her in the kitchen. Short version. Bridger had appeared at Sable at 7:15, evening service. He'd sat at the bar, ordered a club soda, which was new, which meant he was trying to be controlled about this. He'd spoken briefly with the floor manager. Then he'd looked directly into the security camera above the bar with complete deliberation. And then he'd left. No scene, no threat. Just presence. The communication of availability. I know where you work. I know you can see this. I will keep appearing until the terms change. He'll come back, she told Boone. Yes, Boone said. To Sable or here? Sable first. He's not ready to come here. A beat. The scarred eyebrow moved fractionally. He's not that stupid. He's exactly that stupid, she said. He just needs a reason. Boone looked at her with the expression of a man revising an estimate upward. Mr. Calder is aware, he said, and left. That night, Stellan called her into the study. He was standing rather than sitting. Which she had learned by now meant a different kind of conversation was coming. The standing was for things that required clarity rather than comfort. He told her all of it, Otis Wyatt. The structure of the plan. The outside contact Kellum had been feeding. The timeline? 6 weeks of intelligence designed to map Stellan's movements and security patterns ahead of something larger. Something that involved parties outside the city. An old rival of the Calder family who had been waiting for a window and was now, apparently, of the opinion that one was forming. He told her what she was, a probe. He said, Bridger's pursuit of you was designed to generate a measurable response from me. Otis wanted to know if a civilian connected to me would move my hand. And did it? She said. Stellan held her gaze. You're standing in my study, he said. Draw your own conclusion? She looked at him. At the lamp throwing light across the desk. At the shelves of books behind him. Dense, unmarked spines. The collection of a man who read to understand things rather than to be seen reading them. You're telling me all of this, she said. Yes, why? He was quiet for a moment. Because you heard something through a wall and came to me with it when staying quiet would have been easier and safer for you. He picked up the pencil from the desk, turned it in his fingers, not a nervous habit, a thinking gesture, and because what I'm about to say requires you to understand the full context before you make a choice. She stood still. Otis is going to move soon. He'll try to use Bridger again. One more visible display, to confirm whether my security has changed in response to the intelligence leak. He needs to know if his operation has been compromised. Stellan set the pencil down. I need him to believe it hasn't. She understood where this was going. She understood it completely. You need Bridger to see me, she said, in the open. Acting like nothing has changed at Sable, Stellan said. Your normal schedule. Thursday evening service, he held her gaze. Bridger will come. He can't help himself. And Otis will be watching, because this is his last chance to confirm the window before he moves. And if I do this, she said, you end it, I end it. She looked at him. You're asking me to be bait, she said, on purpose. Deliberately, I'm telling you the full picture, he said, and I'm asking you to choose. You can leave tonight, car, different city, money with no obligation attached. You disappear. Otis gets his confirmation anyway because your absence tells him everything, and this becomes a problem I solve without you. A pause. Or you stay. You go to Sable on Thursday. And this ends completely. Not managed. Ended. The lamp. The quiet. The city behind the glass. You didn't tell me any of this before, she said. No, you let me walk in here and make a deal without knowing what I actually was. Your ex-boyfriend is a component of a larger problem, he said. Steady. Not apologetic. Not defensive. Just accurate. I didn't lie to you about anything. I simply didn't give you information you had no reason to have at the time. She looked at him for a long moment. He held it, without shifting, without filling the silence. She hated that she respected that. If I go to Sable on Thursday, she said, and something goes wrong, it won't. If it does, it won't. Not a reassurance. A statement of operational certainty. She turned toward the window. All the light and the noise and the 10,000 things happening simultaneously in rooms and streets and lobbies that she would never see. She had spent 2 years being very small, very careful, very aware of where the doors were. She was tired of being that. All right, she said. She turned back. Thursday. Sable. Normal service. She held his gaze. But I want to know the plan, not the edges of it. The whole thing, he looked at her. "Sit down," he said. Anne told her. She left the study just past midnight. The hallway was dark. The city glow came through the living room windows and reached just far enough into the corridor to make shapes without making clarity. She stood there for a moment. 14 days. She had agreed to 14 days, and what she had gotten was something considerably more complicated. A debt older than her involvement. A man who had received her into his house, knowing all of this, and had eventually told her the truth. Eventually, not immediately, eventually, when it became necessary. When the operation required her informed participation rather than her uninformed presence. She should be angrier about that. She was probably going to be angrier about that later, when she had more bandwidth. Right now, she just felt clear. The particular clarity of someone who had finally seen the full size of the problem and discovered it was exactly as large as she suspected, and could, in fact, be addressed. She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, stood at the sink. Behind her, the soft sound of a lamp clicking off in the study, then footsteps. Stellan moving through his own darkness without a light on, unhurried, as if he'd memorized the geography of this place so thoroughly that visibility was optional. He passed through the kitchen without stopping, moved toward the far hallway, then stopped, his back to her. "You're still up," he said. "So are you." A pause. "The plan will work," he said, not to reassure her, more like a thought spoken aloud. A man confirming something to himself in the dark. "I know," she said. He stood there another moment. Then moved on. She listened to his footsteps disappear down the corridor, finished her water, went to bed, and this time fell asleep in under 10 minutes. Which told her something she wasn't quite ready to name yet. Thursday came the way things came when you had been waiting for them too hard. Faster than expected, and with less ceremony. The morning was quiet, espresso and documents and the 68-degree air. The city outside going about its indifferent business. Boone briefed her after lunch. Clean. The positions his people would occupy, the exits covered, the timing. The signal if something went wrong, which it wouldn't. But there was always a signal. She listened and asked 2 questions. Both practical. Boone answered them without commentary. She went to the guest room and changed into her work clothes. The ones Boone had retrieved from her apartment 2 days earlier, her managing uniform, dark charcoal, pressed. The shoes she kept sable in the staff locker, Boone had retrieved those too. She stood in front of the small mirror above the dresser, pinned her hair back, the way she wore it when she needed people to believe she was composed. Except tonight she was not wearing it as a costume. She just was. She went to the living area. Stellan was at the window. The late afternoon light hitting him at an angle that did something specific to the silver in his hair. He turned when she came in, looked at her. Taking in the uniform. The hair. The set of her shoulders. "You look like someone who runs a room," he said. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment. But it was accurate. "That's the point," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something in it, not quite what she'd call warmth. Something more specific, a kind of recognition. The look of a man who saw something clearly and acknowledged it without embellishment. "The car is downstairs," he said. "I know." She picked up her bag. Walked toward the oak doors. "Dara." She stopped. "Don't let him see you looking for us." Stellan said. "He'll know." She looked back over her shoulder. "I know how to work a room with eyes in it," she said. "I've been doing it for 11 years, the corner of his mouth barely. Almost nothing. Go," he said. She went. The elevator counted down. 40. 41. 40. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, breathing even. The professional stillness she'd developed over years of standing at the pass during a difficult service and maintaining the appearance of absolute control while 14 things went wrong simultaneously in the kitchen behind her. Same skill. Different stakes, the lobby, the revolving door, the heat and noise and smell of the city hitting her after days of filtered penthouse air. Like a reminder that the world outside that floor was still doing what it always did. Loud and indifferent and completely unaware of the particular shape of her particular problem. The black sedan at the curb. She got in. And rode toward Sable. Toward Bridger. Toward whatever was waiting on the other side of Thursday evening, not because someone had told her to, because she had chosen to. And that distinction, that was the only thing that felt entirely, solidly, unmovably hers. Sable was full. Thursday evening service always was. Every table confirmed by noon. The bar running too deep from 7 onward. The kitchen doing what good kitchens did. Controlled chaos that looked, from the dining room, like effortless precision. Dara stood at the host stand at 8:45 and watched her room, still. Even now, she hadn't been here in 6 days. 6 days that felt like 6 weeks. 6 days of filtered air and 68 degrees and a man who marked documents in pencil and slept approximately never. And now here she was, back in the place she actually knew. The smell of it. Good beef and wood smoke and expensive wine opened 20 minutes before service to let it breathe. The sound of it. The specific warm frequency of a room full of people who had paid to be comfortable and were. She knew every table. Knew the couple by the window who came every 3rd week, always ordered the same thing, held hands across the cloth without looking self-conscious about it. Knew the group of 4 near the back who were celebrating something. The posture of celebration, the way people leaned in slightly more than usual. Knew the solo diner at the bar end who read physical newspapers and tipped 30% without fail. Normal Thursday, normal service. Except for the 4 people she couldn't see who were positioned outside and in the lobby and in a car on the street. Boone's voice in her ear. A small receiver she'd tested twice before leaving the Aldrich. Open channel. 2 words if something went wrong. She hadn't needed to say them yet. 8:50. She moved through the room. Table check. Greeting the couples she recognized. 3 words with her floor manager, a compact, serious man named Holt who had been with Sable 4 years and ran the evening service with the authority of someone who had earned it. "Good night so far," Holt said. "Keep it that way," she said. She moved to the bar. And she felt it before she saw it, the change in the room's frequency. Subtle. The way a room changed when something entered it that the room hadn't been expecting. Most people wouldn't notice. They'd keep eating, keep talking. The shift was below the conscious threshold for most. Not for her. She turned. Bridger Wyatt was sitting at the far end of the bar. He'd gotten there quietly. Which was new. He'd come in early, made himself part of the furniture before she arrived. Smart. For him, she felt a cold, specific recognition move through her chest. Not fear. Closer to acknowledgement. The way you acknowledged a storm you'd been tracking on radar. It was here. It was real. It was the size you'd calculated. He was wearing the gray suit again. A glass of something clear in front of him. Water or vodka. He wasn't drunk. The posture was too controlled. He was running on ego and intention tonight. Not alcohol, which was different, and worse. She moved to the floor, deliberate route past 2 tables, stopping to check, to smile, to ask about the food, before she circled toward the bar. Natural, unhurried. The manager doing her round, she reached the bar, stood 2 stools down, exchanged a brief word with the bartender about a wine substitution for table 9, made a note in her book, turned as if to move on. Dara, his voice, low, even. She turned back, as if she'd only just noticed him. 2 seconds of performance, mild surprise, neutral expression. Then, "Bridger!" He looked at her, the full calculation of him running behind his eyes, looking for signs of disruption, fear, the specific quality that told him she'd been affected. She gave him nothing. "Nice night," he said. "We're fully booked," she said. "Bar's open until 11. He picked up his glass, took a slow sip. "Put it down. How have you been?" he said. "How have you been?" As if the answering machine didn't exist. As if the fractured cheekbone wasn't recent enough to still be visible. And it was, she could see it, the slight discoloration along the left side of his face, yellowing now, a week out. "Busy," she said. "You look good," he said. "Rest." She looked at him steadily. "Can I get you anything else? Or, I just want to talk. I'm working. 5 minutes. Bridger, flat. Clean. I'm working." Something moved in his face, the calculation shifting. He was trying to read her, trying to understand the quality of her calm. Whether it was genuine or performed, whether something had changed that he needed to know about. She held the eye contact and thought about nothing. Completely nothing. The way you thought about nothing when you were standing at the pass during a service, and you needed your face to be a surface rather than a window. "All right," he said finally. "I'll be at the bar. Enjoy your evening," she said, and walked away. She moved to the host stand, opened her reservation book, looked at the page, nothing. She was reading nothing. The words were shapes, because she had just, in the corner of her eye, through the window that looked onto the street, seen something. A man, standing on the pavement outside, heavyset, 60, maybe older, dark coat, holding a phone to his ear and looking directly at the front window of Sable Otis Wyatt. She had never met him. but she had seen his photograph once, in a Port Authority filing she'd glanced at years ago, something she'd been asked to review for a charity event. Round face, heavy jaw, the look of a man who had spent his life being underestimated and had learned to use it like a tool. He was looking at the window. He wasn't watching Bridger, he was watching her. Oh. The understanding hit cold and complete. Otis hadn't come to see whether Bridger could reach her. He'd come to see her. To confirm with his own eyes. The woman who had been in Stellan Calder's building for 6 days and then walked back into her restaurant on a Thursday evening like nothing had changed, to see if she looked like someone operating under surveillance, or like someone who had simply returned to normal. She turned a page in the reservation book, smiled at a couple approaching the host stand. Good evening. Welcome to Sable. Normal. Easy. The voice she used when the room needed to believe everything was exactly as it appeared. In her ear, nothing. Boone's channel was open, but silent, which meant he'd seen what she'd seen, which meant the positions were adjusted, and she didn't need to do anything except continue to be exactly where she was doing, exactly what she was doing. She seated the couple, moved to table 26 for a check, and in the window's reflection, she watched Otis Wyatt lower the phone from his ear, stand for a moment, then turn and walk toward the car at the curb, where 2 large men in dark coats were already waiting. It happened quietly. That was the thing she would remember later. She'd expected something more, some escalation, some noise, but it was quiet. Otis Wyatt got into the car, or tried to, and the 2 men were not his men, and the door of the car did not open from the inside. From her position inside Sable, through the reflection in the window, through the glass, she saw, rather than heard it, the specific physics of a man being secured. Calm and thorough and professional, the car pulled away from the curb. 20 seconds. Start to finish. She kept moving through the dining room. At the bar, Bridger's glass was empty. He was looking at his phone, frowning at something, his father's number, probably, going unanswered. She was at table 3 when Boone's voice came through the receiver. Quiet, factual, it's done, he's secure. Mr. Calder is inbound. She didn't react visibly. Just nodded at something the woman at table 3 had said. Something about the duck being perfectly cooked, which it always was, and moved on. Inbound, Stellan was coming here. She hadn't expected that. The plan had been. She runs the room. Boone secures Otis. Bridger gets handled on his way out. Clean. Contained. No reason for Stellan to be physically present, except he was coming anyway. She moved to the back of the dining room, near the pass, where she could see the entire floor and the entrance simultaneously. 9:23. The door opened. Stellan walked in. No suit jacket. Just the dark trousers and gray shirt, sleeves down, buttoned at the wrist. He moved through the entry the way he moved through every space, like the space had been expecting him and had arranged itself accordingly. The host at the stand looked up and went very still in the way. People went still. When they processed something their training hadn't prepared them for. Stellan walked past her without stopping. He found Dara at the back of the room, walked to her, and stopped close. Closer than he usually stood, cedar and cold air arriving with him, his eyes moving across her face, quick, assessing. The same inventory he'd done in the elevator, except now she recognized it for what it was. You're all right, he said. Not a question. Confirming I'm working, she said. Something almost happened at the corner of his mouth. Bridger, she said, being handled. He'll be outside in 10 minutes. He won't know anything happened to his father until morning. By then it won't matter. She looked at him. What are you doing here? A pause. I wanted to see it myself, he said. She didn't ask what it was. She had a feeling she knew. Bridger left at 9:41. She watched him go. He stood from the bar, settled his tab. He'd switched to club soda 2 drinks in, which confirmed everything she'd thought about his state of mind tonight. He picked up his phone, looked at it, put it back in his pocket with the particular movement of a man who was beginning to feel the first edges of something wrong. He walked through the dining room without looking at her, which was also new, because Bridger always looked at her when he left a room. It was a territorial thing, a marking the exit thing. He always looked. He didn't look, which meant his attention was already elsewhere, already calculating. His father's phone going to voicemail twice in 20 minutes. That was enough to start the alarm bells, even through Bridger's ego. The door closed behind him. Holt appeared at her elbow. Anything I should know about? No, she said. Good service tonight, Holt. He accepted this and moved on. She stood at the back of the dining room for a moment. It was over. That was the strange thing. It was over, and the room didn't know. The couple by the window were still holding hands. The newspaper man at the bar was still reading. Table 7 was laughing at something, one of them with their head thrown back, genuinely delighted by whatever had just been said. The room had no idea. Normal Thursday. Dara breathed in the smell of her restaurant, the beef, the wood smoke, the wine, and let herself have 30 seconds of it. Then she went back to work. The car was outside at 11 when service ended. Not Boone this time. A different driver. Same dark sedan, same impenetrable windows. She got in. The drive back was 20 minutes in light traffic. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the city move past the window. The lit offices, the late restaurants. The particular quality of a city at 11 at night. Still moving, but differently. Less urgency. More intention. She thought about Bridger. In the morning he would wake up and try to call his father again. And again. And at some point the mechanism of Otis Wyatt's operation would begin to make itself visible in its absence. The things that had been moving would stop. The calls that had been answered would go silent. And Bridger would understand, eventually, that the thing his father had built was gone. Not violently, not dramatically, just structurally. Removed from beneath him the way a foundation was removed, quietly and thoroughly and only revealed in the settling. She felt not sorry for him. That wasn't the right word. She felt the weight of the fact that he had been used. That Otis had looked at his own son and seen a tool rather than a person, and had picked him up and pointed him accordingly. That was its own kind of violence. Quieter than the kind Bridger had practiced. More patient, more total. She wasn't going to feel sorry for what he'd done to her, but she was capable, from a safe distance, of recognizing the shape of what had been done to him. The Aldrich lobby, the orchids, the late-night hush of a hotel at 11, the elevator 42 floors. She walked down the corridor. The oak doors were open. Stellan was in the living area, standing at the window. The city behind him. He turned when she came in, looked at her. She set her bag down. "How is he?" she said, secured. "My attorney is present. There will be a conversation tomorrow about the terms under which the debt resolves." A pause. "It will resolve cleanly. And Kellum? Already gone. His brother's situation has been addressed. He won't work in this industry again. But he's all right." He paused on that word like he'd tested it for accuracy and found it approximate but acceptable. She nodded. "Bridger," she said, "will be contacted tomorrow morning. By me personally." He watched her face. "He'll be told his father is safe. He'll be told the arrangement going forward. He'll be given the opportunity to leave this city and start somewhere else with enough to actually do it." A pause. "I'll make it clear that coming near you again, at any point, in any context, removes that option permanently. Will it work?" she said. "With Bridger?" he considered. "Probably. He's not his father. He doesn't have the patience for long campaigns. He'll be angry, but he'll also be afraid. Which is the right combination for compliance." She walked to the kitchen, got a glass of water, stood at the sink, said nothing for a moment, then, "You came to Sable tonight, yes. That wasn't in the plan." "No," she turned, looked at him across the room. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words rather than reaching for the obvious ones. "I wanted to see you run that room," he said, "with everything you knew. With Bridger there. With Otis outside." A pause. "I wanted to see who you were when you decided to stop running and decided to stand." She looked at him. "And," she said. "Exactly what I thought," he said. "Which is rare." She set the glass down. And then something in her chest, something she'd been keeping carefully in its compartment since approximately the second night in the guest room, shifted. Not dramatically. Not with ceremony. Just moved. "There's something I need to say to you," she said. He waited. She crossed the room. Halfway. Stood where the ambient light from the windows reached without quite making things clear. "You didn't tell me Otis would be there tonight," she said. "That he'd be watching in person? No. You needed my reaction with Bridger to be real. You needed me walking into that room genuinely believing it was just Bridger." She held his gaze. "So you didn't tell me." Stellan said nothing. "I understand why," she said. "Operationally. The logic is clean." She kept her voice even. "But it was my safety you used to make the operation work. My unknowing, my genuine unawareness of the full risk. You used that." He was still. "Yes," he said. "I did. No qualification. No explanation offered in his own defense. Just the acknowledgement. clean and complete. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. I knew the moment I saw Otis at the window. Because I understood then that he'd come specifically to see me, not Bridger. Which meant you'd known he might come in person. And you'd calculated that my genuine reaction to Bridger would make me more convincing to Otis than if I'd been fully briefed. He held her gaze. Yes, so the question is, she said, whether you were going to tell me that. Or whether I was going to walk out of here tomorrow thinking the plan had been exactly what you described. The window behind him, the city, the cold light. Stellan moved, crossed the room, deliberately, and stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. Cedar and cold air. The absolute stillness I was going to tell you, he said. Tonight. Before you went to bed, he paused. Not because it changes the outcome, not because it undoes the decision I made. Because you went into that room without the full picture and you ran it perfectly, and you deserve to know that you did it without a safety net I'd taken from you. A very slight pause. That required saying. She looked at him. Is that an apology? She said. It's an acknowledgement, he said. I made a calculated decision that used your unawareness as a tool. The calculation was correct. The decision was mine to make, and I stand by the operational logic. His jaw moved slightly. But you deserve to know afterward. That's not operational. It's just right. She was quiet for a moment. You know, she said, most men in your position would have just not mentioned it. Let me think the plan was complete. Moved on. Yes, he said. Why didn't you? He looked at her. Because you came to me through a wall in the dark when it would have been easier and safer to stay quiet, he said. Because you sat across my desk and made a deal with actual terms and kept every one of them. Because you walked into Sable tonight knowing half the truth and handled the rest of it on your feet, without flinching, he paused. The least I owe you is the other half, she breathed in. Out. We're square, she said. Whatever the ledger looked like before tonight, we're square. Something shifted in his face. That almost thing at the corner of his mouth that she had catalogued across 7 days and recognized as the closest he came to expression. Square, he said. Don't make it weird, she said. And this time, the corner of his mouth actually moved. A fraction. Brief. Gone almost before it was there, but there. She slept that night like a person who had set down something heavy. No dreams. No waking at 2 a.m. No lying in the dark assembling and reassembling the problem because the problem was still active and required management. Just sleep. Clean and immediate and total. She woke at 7:15 to light through the curtain gap and the sound of the espresso machine running on schedule, 5:58. It always ran at 5:58. She had slept through the first run, which meant she'd slept almost 9 hours. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept 9 hours. She lay there for a moment and took inventory. Ankle. Still tender but manageable. Arm, healed enough to not require attention. The rest of her, the accumulated physical toll of a week that had included running across a marble lobby, a fractured elevator entry, and one very long Thursday evening, present but not urgent, livable. She got up, found the bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked different, not rested exactly, more like resolved. The particular quality of a face that has stopped bracing for something. She washed her face, dressed, pulled her hair back, walked out. He was at the island. Navy suit today, jacket on, which was new, the espresso mug, the documents, the pencil, and a second mug, placed across the island, already poured. She sat down, took it. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the city outside. Morning light, harder, more factual than evening. The kind of light that showed things as they were. Bridger was contacted at 8, Stellan said without looking up. He's been informed of the arrangement. He asked about his father. I told him Otis was in good health and would remain so provided the arrangement was honored. The pencil marked something. He took it better than I expected. He's not his father, Dara said. No, he's not. Stellan turned a page. He asked about you. She wrapped her hands around the mug. What did you tell him? That you were no longer his concern, a beat. He didn't argue. She looked at her coffee. And Otis? The conversation happened this morning. The debt structure has been renegotiated. Otis loses the port operations he'd been using as leverage. That goes to settlement. The outside contact the one Kellum had been feeding, that arrangement has been severed. Otis will spend the next several years dealing with the structural consequences of a plan that never activated. A pause. He's 63 and tired, and he ran out of cards. He knows it. She absorbed that. Clean, she said. That was the objective. She looked at him across the marble, at the pencil in his hand, at the document he was marking with the focused attention he brought to everything. 14 days, she said. He stopped marking. We said 14 days, she said. That was the deal. He looked up. It's been 7, he said. I know, the terms were 14, I know that too. She held his gaze. But the situation the 14 days was protecting against no longer exists. Bridger isn't coming. Otis isn't coming. The leverage is gone. She turned the mug in her hands. So technically the deal has been fulfilled early, he looked at her. Working. You want to leave, he said. I want to know if I'm choosing to stay, she said. Or if I'm just finishing out the terms. A pause. There's a difference, she said. He set the pencil down, looked at her for a long moment. The morning light doing its factual work on the angles of his face. The old break in his nose. The silver in his hair. The scars on his knuckles resting against the marble. Yes, he said. There is. He reached into his jacket pocket, set a key card on the island between them. She looked at it. Different from the room card she'd been using for 7 days. Heavier. Matte black rather than white. No hotel branding. What does that open? She said. Everything on this floor, he said. Without a time limit attached, she stared at it. Her brain did several things simultaneously. That's... Wait, he's not. She looked at him. Is this a door or a cage? His eyes were steady, dark. The stillness she'd first seen in the elevator, except she understood now that it wasn't flatness. It was depth. The stillness of water that went further down than you could see. That depends entirely on you, he said. She looked at the card, looked at him, thought about her apartment. The vanilla candles. The answering machine with its red 0. The dead plant she'd never gotten around to replacing. The chair she'd been bracing under the door handle for 6 months. Thought about this floor. 68 degrees. Cedar soap. The sound of the espresso machine at 5:58. A man who read physical documents in pencil because he always expected to revise. Thought about what it meant to choose something rather than run from something. 2 very different directions of travel. She picked up the card, didn't say anything. Because some things didn't need words to be complete. She turned it over in her fingers once. The matte surface. The weight of it. Then she set it back down on the marble. I have a condition, she said. He waited. Sable, she said. I keep my position. I keep my schedule. I go to work. She held his gaze. Not under escort. Not with a security shadow. I go to work the way I've always gone to work, because that restaurant is mine, and I built it, and I'm not giving that up for anyone's doors. Silence. Boone drives you. He said. Boone drives me, she agreed, and you tell me your schedule. Within reason. What's the radius of reason? I tell you when I'm leaving and when I'm coming back, she said. I don't file a flight plan. He looked at her for a moment. Acceptable, he said. She slid the card back across the island toward herself. And picked it up. Left it sitting in her palm. Stellan watched her do it. Then went back to his document. Reached for his espresso. Marked something in the margin, as if the conversation had concluded the only way it was ever going to. Later she would try to identify the moment things shifted. Not the card, not the deal, not the elevator or the bourbon or the alcohol wipe that had stung like fire at midnight on a Friday. Not even the study. Not even Thursday. She kept coming back to the same small thing. The second mug, already poured, already waiting, not offered, not presented. Just placed there with the quiet certainty of someone who had done a small calculation in the early morning and acted on it without making anything of it. Without looking up, without saying anything about it, without any expectation that it would be noticed or mentioned or acknowledged. He had simply poured 2 cups instead of 1, because she was there, and he had decided, somewhere between the espresso machine and the marble island, that she was going to be there tomorrow too. That was the moment. She was sure of it. Not the man with the gun on his ribs and the city at his back. Not the architecture of power and danger she'd been afraid of from across the room at Sable for years. Not the penthouse or the guards or the crest on the silver ring. Just a man who poured 2 cups. That was everything. She called her landlord on Friday afternoon. The conversation was short. She'd kept it that way since Bridger, because she'd always thought she might need to leave quickly, and she'd been right about that, if not about the direction. She gave 30 days' notice. The landlord accepted it without surprise or sentiment. 2 years of on-time rent, and she'd never complained about the broken lobby lock. He wished her well. She sat on the guest room bed after the call, looked at the space, the stark white linens, the heavy dresser, the 0 personal touches that Stellan had apparently never felt the need to add. She was going to need to do something about that. Not dramatically, not an invasion, just a book on the nightstand. Her own soap in the bathroom, small things, the kind of things that said a room was inhabited rather than occupied. She pulled out her notebook, the work one, tomorrow's prep list for Sable, the wine allocation she needed to review, the staff schedule for the weekend, the reservation system update she'd been meaning to request for 3 months, normal things, the infrastructure of a normal professional life. She wrote in her neat, efficient hand, and the floor was quiet around her, and the espresso machine would run tomorrow morning at 5:58. And she would sleep through it again, because she was catching up on 6 months of being afraid. And it turned out the body had a very thorough invoicing system for that kind of thing. The card was on the dresser, matte black, sitting there, not a cage, a door that only went where she decided. That evening, Stellan was at the window. She came and stood beside him. Not close, a foot of space between them. But beside, he didn't move, didn't look at her. They stood there for a while. The city doing what cities did at dusk, the transition from daylight to artificial light, the moment when the buildings stopped reflecting the sky and started producing their own brightness. It was the best minute of the day in a skyline view. She'd watched it from Sable's upper windows enough times to know. "How did you end up here?" she said. He looked at her sideways. "A fraction. The 42nd floor," he said. "The family business," she said. "The whole this," she gestured slightly at the room. "The city. The implicit everything." He was quiet for a moment. "My father built it," he said. "He ran it for 30 years. I spent 20 of those years thinking I was going to do something else." A pause. Then he got sick. Then he didn't recover. Then someone had to run it or it collapsed and took a significant number of people down with it. He paused again. "I was the someone. Do you regret it?" she said. He considered the question. Really considered it, the way he considered everything, without reaching for the comfortable answer. "Some days," he said. "The days when the work is what it is. The parts that require decisions I don't enjoy making." A pause. "Other days, no, it suits a particular kind of mind. The kind that finds large complex problems more manageable than small social ones." She looked at his profile, the jaw, the nose, the deep-set eyes facing the city. "You're not good at small social ones," she said. "I'm aware. The second mug this morning," she said. "That was a small social one. You did that correctly." Something moved in his face. "The almost thing? I've had time to practice," he said. "Some things?" She looked back at the city. "I'm not going to be easy," she said. "In any configuration of this. I have strong opinions about thermostat settings. 68 is non-negotiable. I'm going to move things in the kitchen." A pause. "Within reason, I'm going to need at least 1 shelf in the living area for books that aren't your books." "The lower left section," he said. "It's been empty for 2 years," she turned, looked at him. He was still looking at the city. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "I've been thinking about the variables," he said. "It's what I do, and what did the variables conclude?" He turned from the window, looked at her directly, the full quality of his attention, the dark eyes, and that quality that was not measuring anymore. "Something else now. Something quieter and more decided. That you're going to be interesting," he said. "And that interesting is not common." She held his gaze. "That might be the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," she said. "I'm not good at small social ones," he reminded her. "You just said that. It bears repeating." She looked at him for another moment, then looked back at the city. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, and they stood there, side by side, 2 feet of space between them that felt like exactly the right amount. The city making its transition from reflected to self-made light. The floor quiet around them, the espresso machine dormant until 5:58. No performance, no calculation, just this. A week later, the lower left shelf had 3 books on it. She'd brought them from the apartment on the second trip. The one where she'd also brought her good coffee mug, the cast iron skillet she was not willing to live without, and the small framed photograph of herself and her sister at their parents' kitchen table. Taken the summer before their mother passed, Stellan had looked at the photograph when she set it on the shelf. Not long. Just enough to register it. He hadn't said anything. But the next morning when she came out to the kitchen, the photograph had been moved slightly. Angled to catch the light better from the window, she stood there for a moment looking at that, then went and poured her coffee from the second mug that was already waiting and didn't say anything about it either. That was how it worked between them, small things. Noticed, adjusted, not discussed. 3 weeks after Thursday, she was at the island with her notebook when he came back from a meeting she hadn't asked about, and probably wouldn't. He set his jacket over the bar stool, reached for the espresso machine, not because it was 5:58, just because he wanted it, and poured 2 cups without thinking, set one on her side of the island. She looked at it, then at him. He had already turned back to the counter and was reaching for the reports he'd left there before he went out. Pencil already in hand. "Thank you," she said. He paused fractionally. "For the coffee?" "For all of it," she said. He looked at her. The full quality of his attention. The dark eyes. The stillness that was depth rather than distance. He was quiet for a moment. "You thanked me on the first night," he said. "For the cheekbone, I know. And you left the money on the bed. I know that too." A pause. "You kept coming back," he said. "Each time I did," she said. "Why?" he said. The way he said things. Collecting data. Genuinely asking. She thought about that. Really thought about it. The way she'd learned to think about things in the quiet of this floor, without rushing toward the comfortable answer. "Because the first time I walked in here," she said, "you looked at me like I was a problem worth solving. Not a problem to be managed. Not a problem to be removed." She held his gaze. "I hadn't been looked at like that in a long time." He was quiet. "And the second time," he said. "The second time I came back because I had nowhere else to go and enough sense to recognize a door when I saw one. And the third? The fourth, the fifth." She looked at him across the marble island. "Because I wanted to," she said. Simply, as a matter of record. Something happened in his face. Not dramatic, not with ceremony. Just a small, decisive thing, like a lock that had been deciding for a long time and finally chose a direction. He reached across the island, set his hand over hers. His fingers were warm. They always were. Warmer than she expected from a man who seemed to run cold in every other way. He didn't say anything. Neither did she, because some things didn't need words to be complete. Outside the 42-story windows, the city went about its loud and indifferent business, the traffic and the offices and the late restaurants and this 10,000 things happening simultaneously in rooms and streets and lobbies that they would never see. And inside, the floor was quiet. The espresso machine sat dormant until 5:58. The lower left shelf had 3 books on it. The cast iron skillet was in the cabinet where she'd put it, next to the ceramic mug she'd brought from her apartment, next to the photograph of herself and her sister that had been angled slightly to catch the light. Small things, the kind of things that said a place was inhabited rather than occupied. The kind of things that said, someone chose to be here. And was going to be here tomorrow too. That was the whole story. Not the elevator. Not the fractured cheekbone, or the fractured cheekbone's father, or the 11-year-old debt that had collapsed like a bad foundation when the weight of its own deception finally caught up to it. Not the gun in the holster, or the guards in the corridor, or the 42 floors of steel and glass standing between her and the world's louder, messier versions of danger. Just a man who poured 2 cups because she was there, and had decided she was going to be there tomorrow too. That was everything. And it was enough.